Actions, maintaining the original meaning, paragraph structure, names, and details, but using different phrasing and sentence structures where possible. Sometimes I find myself reflecting on whether circumstances would have unfolded differently if my father hadn't passed away on that spring morning. I was merely 6 years old, yet the memory remains as vivid as if it were yesterday. Dad was preparing pancakes, his customary Sunday treat. He always crafted them into amusing shapes that caused me to chuckle. Mom was arranging the table, softly singing a melody I can no longer recall. "Lily, princess, come assist your old man in flipping these culinary creations," Dad exclaimed, brandishing his spatula as though it were an enchanted wand. I leapt from the sofa, abandoning my beloved stuffed bunny, and dashed into the kitchen. That's precisely when it occurred. The spatula dropped to the floor with a clang, and Dad grasped his chest, his expression contorted in agony. Everything that followed is an indistinct sequence of ambulance sirens, hospital hallways, and Mom's sobs. Just like that, my father was gone, leaving behind a vacant home that seemed excessively large and excessively silent. Mom's tears didn't persist for long, however. She encountered Richard at a local bereavement support group for parents who had lost spouses. He appeared pleasant enough, tall, with compassionate eyes and a tender smile that somewhat resembled Dad's. Within a year they had wed, and he relocated to our residence. I was attempting to acclimate to the presence of a new paternal figure when Mom revealed another surprise. She was expecting a child. I recall her countenance radiating with joy as she informed me I was to become an elder sister. I was 8 years of age when Tommy arrived, and that marked a turning point. That's when Mom resigned from her position as a primary school educator. "Tommy requires my presence," she would declare whenever anyone inquired about her choice. These initial years are vital for a youngster's development. I longed to inquire about my own initial years, about whether they hadn't also been vital, but the words remained lodged in my throat. Instead, I observed as Mom's world progressively narrowed until it centered solely on Tommy. She would neglect to prepare my lunch for school, then express astonishment when I mentioned feeling famished at dinner time. "Oh, I apologize, darling," she would respond, absent-mindedly, already redirecting her attention to Tommy. I was so preoccupied with Tommy's medical checkup today. It wasn't an isolated incident. It evolved into our customary routine. Richard took note. I would observe him scrutinizing Mom with a concerned expression as she doted on Tommy, utterly disregarding me at the dining table. One evening, as I sat alone completing my schoolwork, he took a seat beside me. "You know, Lily," he remarked softly, assisting me with my mathematical exercises, occasionally, individuals become so engrossed in a single matter that they fail to perceive what else they might be overlooking. As Tommy matured, the strain within our household became undeniably apparent. Richard attempted to discuss Mom's fixation on Tommy with her numerous times, but it invariably concluded in the same manner, with Mom becoming defensive and irate. I distinctly remember one particular evening when Richard broached the subject during supper. Tommy, approximately 5 years old, was shifting his food around his plate while Mom hovered over him, endeavoring to persuade him to consume just one additional mouthful. "Sarah," Richard stated, setting down his utensil, "we must address this. You cannot continue to fuss over him in this manner. He must learn to accomplish tasks independently." Mom's expression immediately became rigid. "What are you insinuating? That I am an inadequate parent? That is not my intention." "And you are well aware of it," Richard retorted, maintaining a composed tone, "but you have 2 children present, not merely one, and a spouse as well, I might add." I feigned intense interest in my mashed potatoes, but I was meticulously following every word. "Tommy requires my attention," Mom retorted sharply. "He remains so youthful." "I was youthful as well," I murmured beneath my breath, but no one appeared to perceive my words. The situation reached a critical juncture when Richard proposed registering Tommy for Little League Baseball. I was positioned on the staircase, ostensibly completing my assignments, when I overheard their dispute in the kitchen. Absolutely not. Mom's voice was piercing. Are you cognizant of the potential dangers associated with baseball? He could be struck by the ball, or sustain an ankle injury, or, for goodness sake, Sarah, he must engage with life. You cannot safeguard him from every conceivable risk. But Mom remained resolute. Instead, she registered Tommy for art lessons at the neighborhood community center. I can still visualize Tommy's glum expression as he sat there, listlessly moving his brush across the paper, while other children genuinely attempted to acquire skills. He withdrew after a mere 3 sessions, and Mom attributed the blame to the instructor for failing to appreciate her son's artistic aptitude. Meanwhile, Richard commenced allocating more time to me. Perhaps it was his method of counterbalancing Mom's conduct, or perhaps he simply perceived a child who required an advocate. He would transport me to my karate lessons thrice weekly, attending every session, applauding more enthusiastically than any other parent when I attained my belts. But while I was thriving under Richard's focus, Tommy was evolving into an increasingly challenging individual. He would leave his room in a state of complete disarray, toys and garments strewn about, and Mom would direct that familiar look toward me, the one I had grown to anticipate with apprehension. Lily, be a darling and tidy Tommy's room, she would direct, not truly posing a question, but issuing a command. One day, Richard became aware of this routine. She is not his domestic servant, Sarah. He voiced his objection. He must learn to tidy up after himself. That's when Mom erupted in tears, deploying her ultimate tactic. I knew it. You harbor greater affection for her than for your own offspring. How can you subject Tommy to such treatment? I witnessed Richard's countenance droop, observed the defiance dissipate from his gaze. He glanced at me apologetically, then extended his hands in a gesture of acquiescence. Very well. Have it your way, he uttered softly, departing. Following that incident, he ceased disputing with Mom regarding Tommy, but the gaze he directed at me conveyed everything. He hadn't abandoned me, even if he had conceded defeat in his efforts with her. Upstairs, during an argument with Mom, it was a minor consolation, but sometimes minor consolations are all we possess. High school graduation day was a mix of joy and sadness. As I stood there in my graduation attire, looking over the attendees, I noticed Richard, radiating with pride. Mom was present as well, but she was constantly looking at her phone, likely messaging Tommy's caregiver. Later that evening, Richard summoned me to his study. I've been accumulating funds, he revealed, taking out a file filled with university pamphlets. You have the freedom to choose any school, Lily. The possibilities are endless. Before I could answer, Mom interrupted. You can't be serious, she protested. That money ought to be reserved for Tommy's future. He'll require it more. Richard's expression became stern, a look I'd become accustomed to during these types of disagreements. This is not up for discussion, Sarah. My decision is final. I ultimately selected Marshall University in West Virginia, distant enough for a new beginning, yet not so distant that occasional visits were impossible. On the day Richard assisted me in moving into my dormitory, Mom was unable to attend due to Tommy's anxiety about her absence. College life was precisely what I required. For the first time, I felt liberated from the stigma of being the less preferred child. I contacted home weekly, but my discussions were primarily with Richard. Mom was perpetually occupied with Tommy. Your brother is experiencing a challenging period, Richard clarified during one of our calls, his voice exhibiting fatigue. He's associating with some undesirable individuals. I attempted to enroll him in some extracurricular activities, but your mother— Let me guess, I interjected. She claimed you were being excessively strict with him. Precisely. Called me a tyrant for suggesting he might need some structure. Richard sighed. She insists I don't comprehend his sensitivity. My trips home became less regular as Tommy's conduct deteriorated. When I did visit, he seldom recognized my presence, remaining secluded in his room with his video games. The rare times I observed him, he appeared pallid and agitated, his gaze fixed on various screens. After graduating, I secured a position at Deloitte in their consulting division. I remained in West Virginia, advancing my career while observing from a distance as my brother regressed further into his self-inflicted seclusion. During one of my infrequent visits home, I attempted to knock on his door. "Tommy, interested in having lunch?" My treat. The only reply I received was the sound of simulated gunfire from his current game. Mom, walking by in the hallway, simply shrugged. "He's not feeling sociable at this moment. He's under a great deal of stress, you see." The disparity between our lives was glaring. While I was advancing my professional aspirations, Tommy was pursuing digital accomplishments, sustained by Mom's perpetual justifications. Richard's despondent expression conveyed everything, but by that point, even he had mostly relinquished attempts at intervention. By 27, I had finally accumulated sufficient funds for a down payment on my own residence. It wasn't extravagant, merely a one-bedroom apartment in a respectable area, but it was my own. The day I received the keys, I couldn't suppress my smile. All those years of economizing, of bringing my own lunches, and resisting the allure of high-end clothing had ultimately yielded results. "You all must come and visit," I declared during my weekly call home. "I'm hosting a housewarming gathering next Saturday. I'll prepare the meal, Richard. I'm even preparing your beloved lasagna." "Wouldn't miss it for anything, kiddo," Richard responded affectionately. Mom's voice interjected on the alternate line. "Oh dear, I don't believe we can attend. Tommy has commitments that day." "Commitments?" I couldn't conceal the disbelief in my voice. "What sort of commitments?" "Very significant ones," Mom stated nebulously. I could hear Tommy's video game operating loudly in the background. On the day of the housewarming, only Richard arrived. He presented a potted plant and a bottle of wine. "Your mother extends her regards," he conveyed, but we both understood that was a fabrication. Over the meal, Richard updated me on the true situation at home. Tommy, now 20, hadn't pursued higher education and divided his time between gaming and socializing with his drinking companions. Richard had attempted to provide assistance, offering him a role at his construction firm, simply as an entry point. "You know," Richard elaborated, swirling pasta on his fork, "everyone must begin somewhere. But Sarah," he shook his head, "Sarah asserted it would be demeaning for him. Can you fathom that? Sarah believed Tommy was too intellectually superior for physical work, too intelligent to be employed, yet not too intelligent to rely on his parents for financial support," I reflected. Richard offered me a melancholic smile. "I continue to strive, Lily. Heaven knows I continue to strive." That marked the final genuine dialogue we shared. 2 years later, I received the call that irrevocably altered everything. Richard had suffered a collapse at work, a severe cardiac event, mirroring my father's passing. By the time I arrived at the medical facility, he was deceased. The memorial service was dreamlike. Mom staged a dramatic display, weeping excessively and informing anyone who would listen what a remarkable spouse Richard had been. "We were so content," she lamented. "How will we endure without him?" I observed her performance with a combination of revulsion and commiseration. Her tears were not for Richard. They were for her own predicament. I could discern the machinations behind her grief-stricken exterior. Richard had been the exclusive provider. Without his earnings, how would she sustain Tommy in the manner to which he'd grown used? Tommy didn't even make the effort to wear an appropriate suit to the funeral. Here, he arrived wearing rumpled khaki trousers and a polo shirt that was past its prime. He devoted the majority of the service to looking at his phone, while Mom fabricated justifications for him. He's managing his sorrow in his unique manner. Standing there at Richard's burial site, I couldn't avoid contemplating how events had mirrored the past. Another paternal figure, another cardiac arrest, another memorial service. Only this instance, I was mature enough to perceive everything distinctly, encompassing the reality that Mom's weeping was more attributable to her financial situation than her emotional distress. A year following Richard's demise, I had predominantly lost communication with Mom and Tommy. The limited information I received originated from Aunt Linda's sporadic calls. They're subsisting on Richard's accumulated funds, she informed me. Your mother liquidated his Chevrolet last month. The instruments from his workshop were sold prior to that. I endeavored not to be concerned. I genuinely did. But when Mom's number appeared on my phone one Tuesday evening, my heart still experienced a palpitation. Lily, her voice sounded diminished compared to my recollection, I require your presence at home. Urgently. Something in her intonation compelled me to reserve a flight for the subsequent day. When I arrived at our former residence, I scarcely recognized it. The once immaculate lawn, which Richard had diligently tended, was overrun with vegetation. Paint was deteriorating from the window casings, and one of the shutters was hanging askew. However, the house wasn't the sole entity that had deteriorated. Mom greeted me at the door, and I had to restrain a gasp. The spirited woman I recalled had been supplanted by someone who appeared 2 decades older than her chronological age. Pronounced wrinkles marked her countenance, and her hair, which she'd invariably maintained flawlessly colored and arranged, exhibited stark gray origins. Enter, she instructed, guiding me into the living area. The house possessed a musty odor, and soiled dishes were accumulated in the sink. A fine stratum of dust coated all surfaces. This from the woman who used to mandate I re-cleanse plates if she detected a solitary water blemish. Mom, what's transpiring? I inquired, seating myself on the sofa. A spring protruded into my thigh, another item Richard would have rectified promptly. She experienced an emotional breakdown almost instantaneously. We're depleting our funds, Lily. My retirement income scarcely suffices for the utilities, and the savings— She wrung her hands in her lap. They're nearly exhausted. What about Tommy? Is he contributing financially? Mom's expression exhibited a complex interplay of humiliation and protectiveness. He's seeking employment. It's not his responsibility. These potential employers simply don't comprehend him. The most recent establishment desired him to commence work at 8 a.m. You're aware Tommy's not a morning individual, and the preceding one anticipated him to perform manual labor, given his intellect. I sensed my jaw clenching. Mom, at his age and lacking professional background, he can't afford to be selective about— You don't grasp the situation, she interrupted, her voice escalating to that recognizable pitch that invariably heralded a Tommy defense. Then, abruptly, her tone shifted. Lily, we require your assistance. We won't endure without it. I'm reluctant to request this, but you're thriving in your profession. I anticipated what was forthcoming. A part of me desired to decline, to remind her of all the instances she prioritized Tommy over me, but observing her haggard expression, the quivering hands, the imploring eyes, I was unable. How much do you require? When she stated $1,500 monthly, I almost choked. That represented a substantial portion of my earnings, yet I discovered myself assenting nonetheless. Where's Tommy currently? I inquired as I made preparations to depart, already experiencing regret for my decision. Oh, he's attending a job interview, Mom brightened marginally. A very auspicious position with a technology firm. Through the window, I could observe Tommy's bedroom light illuminated and the recognizable glow of his computer display. Certain aspects remained constant. True to my commitment, I established an automated transfer of $1,500 to Mom's account each month. Every instance I observed that deduction from my bank statement, I reassured myself it was the appropriate course of action, even if it necessitated delaying my personal aspirations for a more spacious apartment or new vehicle. I commenced visiting with greater regularity, although each visit resembled entering a time warp. Tommy was perpetually present, either engrossed in his computer display or reclining on the couch with a beer in his grasp. How's the employment search progressing? I'd inquire. Mind your own affairs, he'd retort, or occasionally simply grunt and amplify the volume on his game. During the festive season, I couldn't tolerate observing the living area in such disrepair. The wallpaper was detaching, and a water blemish marred the ceiling, which would have infuriated Richard. Consequently, I expended my Christmas bonus engaging contractors to renovate it. When Mom sustained an ankle injury in February, I contacted her to ascertain her well-being. "Oh, it's not excessively severe," she responded, although I could discern the discomfort in her voice. "Is Tommy providing assistance?" "He's occupied with some online interviews. I arranged for a home health aide the following day." The funds I'd been accumulating for a vacation were utilized to compensate her services for the ensuing 3 weeks. Then transpired the day I entered the house and encountered an unfamiliar individual reclining across our sofa. She appeared as though she'd emerged from a reality television program. Artificial fingernails that could serve as implements, excessive cosmetics, and attire that left little to the imagination. She was perusing her phone, encompassed by empty chip bags and soda containers. "Who are you?" I inquired, although I possessed a premonition I comprehended the response. Tommy materialized from his room. "This is Candy," he declared, "my fiancée. She resides here presently." Candy didn't even elevate her gaze from her phone, merely popped her chewing gum audibly. I observed in astonishment as she reached into the grocery bag I had just Lily's unwelcome guest consume the high-end biscuits she had purchased for her mother. "Charmed, I'm sure," Lily mumbled quietly. Later, she phoned her mother to discuss the incident. "Oh, Lily," her mother exclaimed, sounding more lively than she had in a long time. "Isn't it fantastic? Tommy's finally found some stability. Candy has been a positive influence. He hasn't been out carousing with those dreadful companions in weeks." Lily mentally contrasted this with the empty beer bottles she'd noticed in the recycling bin, thinking, "That's because she's consuming all my imported ale at home." However, she remained silent. "And he's discussing employment," her mother continued enthusiastically. "Candy's cousin has a contact at a tech firm. Tommy believes it could be his major opportunity." Lily vocalized non-committal sounds, reflecting on the numerous major opportunities Tommy had alluded to previously. But her mother was so content in her state of perpetual optimism that Lily couldn't bring herself to disillusion her. Her subsequent visit home began typically. Lily maneuvered grocery sacks as she entered, only to halt abruptly. The residence resembled the aftermath of a cyclone. Unwashed dishes accumulated in the sink, takeaway boxes littered every surface, and clothing was dispersed across the living room. Candy reclined on the sofa, her flawlessly manicured fingers scrolling on her phone. She didn't acknowledge Lily's arrival. "You realize," Lily stated sharply, "you reside here without paying rent, consuming food I finance. The minimum you could do is clean some dishes." Candy looked up leisurely, a smirk evident on her heavily glossed lips. "Who do you believe you are, entering and issuing directives? This isn't your residence." "I was raised here," Lily retorted. "You're merely a visitor." Candy then emitted a harsh, triumphant laugh that sent shivers down Lily's spine. "Oh, darling, you're mistaken. This dwelling is now Tommy's. Your mother transferred everything to him. There's a legal document and everything." Lily located her mother in the kitchen, sorting coupons she never utilized. "Is it factual?" Lily's voice sounded distorted to her own ears. "Did you draft a will bequeathing everything to Tommy?" Her mother initially avoided eye contact, fidgeting with the documents before her. Then, a firmness seemed to solidify in her demeanor. "Yes," she affirmed flatly. "It's factual." "I don't comprehend," Lily whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm the one assisting you. I'm the one providing financial support monthly. Tommy doesn't work, doesn't offer anything. Don't you dare speak about your sibling that way." Her mother's voice escalated sharply. "You don't comprehend him. You never have." "Comprehend what? That he's a freeloader? That he's perfectly satisfied living off my finances while his girlfriend devastates our home?" "Oh, cease your dramatics." Her mother's face contorted into something unfamiliar. "You desire the truth? I never cherished you as I cherished Tommy. He surpasses you in every significant aspect, and I no longer wish to see you here." The words impacted like physical assaults. All these years, Lily had convinced herself that her mother did love her, merely expressing it uniquely, that beneath her fixation with Tommy, she harbored affection for Lily. Now she understood the reality. Lily departed, Candy's triumphant laughter echoing behind her. 21 years of anticipation, of rationalizing, of striving to gain her mother's love, all concluded with the soft click of a closing door. The journey back from her mother's residence was indistinct. Lily has no recollection of the 4-hour drive, ascending the stairs to her apartment, or even settling onto her sofa. However, she vividly remembers the moment of realization that struck as she examined her banking application. The automated transfer to her mother's account, $1,500 each month for the previous year, was displayed. Her finger lingered above the screen momentarily before she resolutely selected Cancel Recurring Payment. For the subsequent weeks, Lily immersed herself in work, endeavoring to disregard the void in her budget that abruptly felt like a prospect rather than a liability. She initiated research into investment avenues for the funds she'd been forwarding home. Perhaps she could finally commence saving for a residence of her own, an actual house, not merely an apartment. Then, precisely 1 month following her last visit, her mother contacted her. The funds weren't deposited, she stated directly, without greetings or inquiries. There must be an error with the financial institution. There's no error, Lily responded, surprised by the composure in her voice. I terminated the transfers. A period of shocked quietude ensued before her mother erupted. You what? How could you after all I've provided for you? Lily actually chuckled at that. All you provided for me? Like what, Mom? Disregarding my presence? Compelling me to be Tommy's attendant? Informing me you never cherished me? That's distinct, she retorted, employing her habitual Tommy defense tone. You realize I was agitated, but you can't simply cease assisting us. We're dependent on that money. Tommy and Candy are organizing a trip to Cancun. They require a vacation, Lily interjected, her voice escalating. Tommy requires a vacation from what, precisely? Engaging in video games? Consuming beer? Allow me to clarify something, Mom. Tommy doesn't require a vacation. He requires employment. How dare you speak of your sibling in that manner? You're merely envious because what? Because you bequeathed everything to him? Excellent. You've made your selection. Now he can provide for you. You unappreciative, mercenary little... The remainder of her tirade disintegrated into a torrent of accusations and demands. Lily allowed her mother's outburst to continue briefly before interjecting. Farewell, Mom. Refrain from contacting me again. She promptly blocked her mother's number, preempting any further response. However, her mother's attempts to communicate persisted. Over the subsequent weeks, a deluge of messages arrived through every conceivable medium. Facebook messages lamented her mother's financial struggles. Instagram comments decried Lily's perceived filial failings, and emails recounted numerous sacrifices her mother had purportedly made, many of which Lily couldn't recall. Tommy also participated, sending hostile texts accusing Lily of dismantling the family. Mom's distressed because of you, he conveyed. You better resume the financial support, or else. Lily blocked him as well, but not before suggesting, here's an unconventional notion. Attempt securing employment. Even Candy attempted contact via LinkedIn, of all platforms, with an extensive message about how Lily was devastating her mother and how Tommy was purportedly too fragile to endure the pressures of employment currently. Lily had to acknowledge Candy's ingenuity, at the very least. 6 months have now elapsed. Lily is unaware of their current circumstances, and for the first time in her life, she experiences no remorse about that. Perhaps they finally acknowledge that Tommy must become self-sufficient. Perhaps they're still anticipating Lily's capitulation and the resumption of her financial assistance. Perhaps they've identified another individual to exploit. The reality is, Lily doesn't require that knowledge. What Lily does know is that the $1,500 she previously remitted monthly has been allocated to a down payment fund for her own residence. She knows that her sleep has improved, no longer disrupted by irate messages or guilt-inducing calls. She knows that Richard would be pleased with her for finally asserting herself. Recently, Lily passed a construction site displaying a now hiring advertisement. Momentarily, she considered photographing it and forwarding it to Tommy, but instead, she simply smiled and continued driving. Their difficulties are no longer her concern. Finally, after all these years, she is liberated.